the House of Representatives later this Thursday. Here to talk about it with us from Washington, reporter Jim Barnes. In our studio, we've got Zach Miller of Democrats Abroad, Tom McGrath of Republicans Abroad, Anne Desine, who teaches American Studies at Paris University at Nanterre, and from Nashville, Tennessee, Judson Phillips, founder of Tea Party Nation. I want to thank all of you for being back with us. Couple of comments for you from the France 24 Debate Facebook page. Let's see, I have them right here. One is from Don from Montreal. He says, by all means, find ways to decrease the debt and deficit, but don't cut off your nose to spite your face. Erasing the deficit is going to require a planned reduction of expenditures over several years, and it isn't going to just happen by refusing to increase the debt ceiling at this time. And Adabong has a question here for Judson Phillips. He says, how do you claim fiscal responsibility wherein most at the top of your leadership are the same guys who helped Bush cripple the economy after Clinton with skyrocketed spendings and useless wars? Judson Phillips, what's your answer to that?
Yeah, well, the following question has been brought to you by the party of treason. Here's the point. It doesn't matter.
Adabong is not a U.S. citizen, by the way.
Oh, okay. I didn't hear that part. But it could have been written by the party of treason. Here's the point. It doesn't matter who got us into these trouble. We can sit here and argue till the cows come home whose fault it is. That's not going to fix the problem. You know, there's a saying that I'm particularly fond of. It's called "fix the problem, not the blame." And up in Washington, you know, everybody wants to go around, oh, it's their fault, it's their fault. John Boehner can't come to the table and demand spending cuts because he was a big spending Republican 10 years ago, et cetera, et cetera. It doesn't matter. What is important right now is that our country is facing crippling debt caused by unrealistic and unsustainable spending. I don't care who was responsible for the spending in the past. It's got to stop now. If Boehner, if Harry Reid wants to join in the Tea Party and cutting spending, I'm all for it. Because if we don't cut the spending, you know, we've got a picture of what is going to happen in the future. That's right there in Greece. I mean, their economy's imploding. You've got riots in the streets. If we don't get our house in order a few years from now, that's America's future.
What is your reaction to that, Zach?
Well, you know, I think it's very easy to say, let's not think about that, let's not talk about that. But more than 80% of the budget, more than 80% of the debt was like this when the president walked in the door. No. And, well, what's your numbers? 60%?
40% has now become 80%.
No, it's longer.
The amount of debt to GDP has almost doubled in 3 years.
We'll disagree about the numbers. But basically, the important thing to remember is that the last time we had a budget surplus was under a president named Clinton, who had a capital D behind his name. And we can't expect that every time the Republicans take control of the administration, that the Democrats come in afterwards and have to clean up after the circus has ended and the elephants have left the building. So I think it's really important that, you know, we look at solutions, but the solutions are not being realistically looked at. And we have people who right now who won't compromise, who won't agree on anything. This is not like a Reagan. This is not like a Republican administration.
Let me just ask you now. Yeah. For people here in France watching this whole debate, the stimulus that was in the United States was a relatively timid one by some standards. What do you see when you listen to the rhetoric on this?
Okay, it's true in Europe because we agreed to a bigger role of the government. We were convinced that the stimulus plan was needed and that it was probably not too big. I'm not sure it was not big enough, but it was necessary. And when I hear the two of you fight here, it's exactly what's going on in Congress. And although as a French person, I tend to lean to the Democratic side, and that's probably why I'm sitting on that side of the plateau, it is true that everybody's playing the blame game, who spent more, etc. I mean, if we want to be fair with Clinton, of course, he left with a huge surplus, but the situation of the economy was very different. Then, of course, Bush was supposed to be a conservative, and yet he increased the role of the government. He got the U.S. involved in 2 wars that he did not finance, etc. So I think that the problem is that I would agree that even the Tea Party that are very much caricatured in France and very much criticized, I think they're good people that are really worried for their country, so that we have people on the left and on the right who want the same. They want less debt. They want the situation in order. And my reading and my regret personally is that candidate Obama was able to inspire people during the campaign because he had understood, and I think he had understood, that the only way to change the system, the only way to stop building the debt was to reform the Washington as usual. And my regret, and I'm sort of very disappointed by that, is that he did not change anything. His team was the team that created the financial chaos, etc. So if we want, I mean, for me, this is posturing. Boehner wants to have the vote so that he can say, look, the Democratic Senate did not vote. The Democrats are saying, look, they don't want to increase taxes. And it's true that there is probably a need to at least work on the tax code so that some big corporations pay some tax and do not pay less than a housemaid, for instance. But everybody is posturing, and the only solution would be to change the system. I was reading about an initiative called Americans Elect, in which there would be an electronic convention so that the people could select neither a Democrat or a Republican, but focusing on the subject they want. And an idea
so
in
turn
this
it into
project,
Switzerland, in other words, with referendums and the like.
Yeah, but in the end, the ticket would be composed of a Democrat and an independent or Republican, or a Republican and an independent and the other party.
Interesting,
so that's interesting.
That you see that times have changed when you listen to Barack Obama in his speech this past Monday when he quotes one of his predecessors, but perhaps not the one you'd think.
Would you rather reduce deficits and interest rates by raising revenue from those who are not now paying their fair share? Or would you rather accept larger budget deficits, higher interest rates, and higher unemployment? And I think I know your answer. Those words were spoken by Ronald Reagan. But today, many Republicans in the House refuse to consider this kind of balanced approach, an approach that was pursued not only by President Reagan, but by the first President Bush, by President Clinton, by myself, and by many Democrats and Republicans in the United States Senate.
Jim Barnes, how did that go over, Barack Obama quoting Ronald Reagan?
Well, I don't think a lot of Republicans are going to be persuaded by President Obama quoting Reagan. Indeed, I imagine that there are some Republicans who are so opposed to the president that they would see it as disingenuous. I think it is true. President Reagan raised income taxes in his first term after he had cut them. But I think right now that was a really different time when members of Congress seem to be able to, whether you like it or not, get together and cut a deal. The atmosphere up on Capitol Hill and between Capitol Hill and 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue is incredibly charged right now. And like I said, I think the only thing that actually gets the deal done is the fear that both sides have about who will get blamed if a deal doesn't get done.
And just to give you an idea of how charged that atmosphere is in Washington, take a listen, for instance, on the campaign trail to Minnesota Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann on Tuesday in Iowa. She reacted, warning John Boehner she'll vote no to any bill that raises the debt ceiling and pointing the finger at Barack Obama.
Despite what the president said last night, the people do understand what raising the debt ceiling means. It's the president of the United States who doesn't understand what raising the debt ceiling means, because the president started out his remarks last night by comparing raising the debt ceiling to being just a little credit card debt. Well, $14.3 trillion in debt today is not a little credit card debt. The president also last night called raising the debt ceiling routine. He said we've done it routinely. Well, that's the problem with Washington. They've been routinely raising the debt ceiling, and that's what people all across the country have been telling me as well. They've been saying, stop making it routine to continue to spend money that we don't have.
Tom McGrath, that's a principled statement from someone who has an opinion. But how do you strike a deal now when you have the Republicans talked themselves into a corner at this point?
I don't think
you
they
need
have.
a deal at some point.
As I said earlier, I think they've really now got the upper hand because Obama really hasn't put anything on the table. He hasn't proposed anything. The Republicans now have a plan, and it looks like they'll be able maybe get it through the House this afternoon.
She says she's voting no.
There will be others who vote no too as well. The Tea Party are people who are kind of like, remember in '92, the Ross Perot people. They're disgusted with the amount of debt that's been taken on by our country, the deficit, the budget deficit, and certainly the type of people who are bringing all that debt on, the members of Congress and the administration and the bureaucrats in Washington. Same thing happened at the end of the 1970s when people were disgusted with Jimmy Carter. Reagan was not far. He was viewed as extreme at that time as the Tea Party is right now. And Perot attracted a lot of the same type of voters that are now considering themselves Tea Partiers. These are people who don't necessarily get alarmed and don't necessarily get shook up, but the amount of debt, the deficit, and the budget problems right now have gotten people very upset. And I think she speaks to some of that, but it's not.
But hang on a second.
It's not something that the Republicans should be afraid of right now. I think we have the upper hand.
Hang on a second. In another life, you're a banker, right? The world economy, we're in a globalized world here. If they stick to this principled statement, to this principled position, the world economy stands to suffer a lot.
Thank you for bringing that up. No one really knows what will happen if we don't raise the limit and that there is a problem next week. But an investor,
are you nervous?
I'm nervous because we don't know what it will be. But there are two ways of looking at this. One is, assume you've got two bonds. And one bond, you get paid your interest on time, the debt limit gets raised, but there's been no solution to the spending problem or to the deficit problem. It's just that we've raised the debt limit so we continue paying your interest. But you know that the situation in the United States is getting worse every day, even though you're getting your interest. On the other bond, let's say I miss getting interest payments for 2 months or 3 months or 4 months. That's painful. But maybe the price of that was an agreement that substantially reduces the deficit. Which bond do you want?
If there could be an agreement, but in the dysfunctional Congress, there's no room for an
agreement.
agreement.
There will be an agreement of some sort. But right now, Obama has taken himself kind of out of the negotiations for that. It's up to the House to pass, hope to get the Senate to agree with it, and Obama will be the full person responsible for this problem if he vetoes that bill.
But if the Congress becomes responsible, we could imagine that there was a negotiation between the members, realizing that maybe they should stop spending, maybe they should return to pay-go and make sure that when they add spending, they cut something or they add taxation.
I think you missed the point because 3/4 of our spending is entitlements, or 65%.
Yes,
those are things that are going to take a Republican president to sign. It won't happen with Obama right now. Right, and he can't do that because his base would abandon him. He would lose his re-election. So
let's look at
he has agreed to
let's
some
look
cuts.
at one of the latest tracking polls. The numbers for Barack Obama, his job approval rating. It's at 44% approve, 55% disapprove. Zachary Miller, one of the criticisms that's been leveled against Barack Obama is that he's not been a good negotiator.
Well, I think, this president came in wanting to, like you said, change the atmosphere in Washington. He wanted to talk with his opposing party and compromise and kind of bring back the spirit of Reagan and Tip O'Neill. But we've never gotten to that. We've never even got anywhere close to that. And so I think there's a lot of frustration.
Was that when he announced to
there's a lot of frustration on the part.
Won?
So let me finish. There's a lot of frustration on the part of the base because of that situation.
Judson Phillips.
Yeah, I was saying, I was listening to this when he says Obama came in and wanted to talk and everything. That's when the Republicans were objecting some things, and he looked at him and said, "Hey, we won. Hey, that's a great conversation to have. That is the true spirit of compromise." Obama's telling everybody, "Hey, we won, so shut up."
The other comment was elections have consequences, which basically means I won. All right, the loss.
Well, elections do have consequences.
Exactly.
Do you think
and
that
so they do.
The American people voted Obama in with a certain idea of things that things they wanted to do, and because he said elections have consequences, that's no true statement.
His approval rating has gone from 65 down to 44. So they've got a chance
Let me ask Jim Barnes in Washington on this one. Jim, who's got more wiggling room here? Is it Barack Obama or is it John Boehner?
That's a tough one. I'm really not sure who has more wiggle room. I mean, traditionally, the president gets more credit when the economy is good than he probably deserves, and likewise, the president gets more blame when the economy is bad than he probably deserves. If this impasse trips a default, which then sends the markets spiraling downward, which then pulls the economy back into a real recession, the president is going to shoulder an awful lot of the blame on this one. At the same time, Republicans have not covered themselves in glory on this one. Republicans have to remember that they got elected in 2010 mainly as kind of a protest to the president, and in large part because people were unhappy with the economy. But the problem is that if there's a default here and we go down, go down in terms of,
credit rating,
economic growth really slows, then, the Republicans are going to own some of this economy. The Republicans are going to own a little bit more of this economy than if not. And I think therein lies kind of the problem for Republicans. Their views aren't widely popular in the country, and as I said earlier, I think it's going to be incumbents of both parties
who will suffer,
who are going to get kicked.
I think there are two things we could add about the role of the Congress, because there's one poll we never mentioned. It's the lack of trust of the American people for members of Congress and the Congress. So when they did return the Republicans in 2010, it was more like they didn't like what Obama was doing. He was not doing enough, but it did not especially like the Republicans. But they wanted divided government so as to avoid the Democrats having too much power.
Checks and balances. Just before we go, I got to ask this question to Judson Phillips. We have a poll here of leading Republican candidates so far, because this is all in the build-up to the 2012 election. And on the Republican side, we see Mitt Romney at 30%, Michelle Bachmann, Tea Party candidate, 16%. How do you think that it's going to pan out?
The polls right now are all over the place. Romney is going to fade. I love Michelle Bachmann to death. I don't think she's going to end up being the nominee. If I have to predict it today, I think you're going to be seeing a Perry-Bachmann ticket for next fall, because Rick Perry, whether you like him or not, he really is probably the only Republican out there who can bring together both the Tea Party wing of the party and the establishment wing of the party.
All right, and very briefly, because we're almost out of time, Tom McGrath, your prediction?
Who do I think will win the nomination? I think Romney has the upper hand, frankly. I think if he can get through Ohio, New Hampshire, and South Carolina, it'll be hard to derail him.
All right. Unfortunately, we don't have time to go to...
I agree with that, though.
We don't have time to go all the way around the room on that one. But I want to thank you. I want to thank all of you. I want to thank Zachary Miller. I want to thank Tom McGrath. I want to thank NDC. And I want to thank, as well, Jim Barnes for joining us from Washington, and Judson Phillips from Nashville, Tennessee. And thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate. Stay with us. Coming up next, it's time for business. And we'll be looking at the dollars and cents of it all as that deadline ticks towards default.